The 10th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.
Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news. Once again, from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, here is your host, Andrea McMaster.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this edition of Consider This. I'm Andrea McMaster. We're glad that you could be with us today. Well, after more than 3 decades, the war on cancer declared by President Nixon in 1971 is still going on in this country. The question is, are we winning that war? Well, we'll hear some answers today from some state experts, and also the answer to that question is really not simple. The good news is that since Nixon's initiative, there have been incredible advances in cancer detection, prevention, and treatment. Some of that incredible work going on right here in our state at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, Eppley Cancer Center. And today joining us is Dr. Ken Cowan, who is the director of the Eppley Cancer Center.
Hi.
And Dr. Tony Hollingsworth, who also works at the Eppley Cancer Center and doing research. And we're going to highlight one of the programs that he's been working on recently. So thank you both for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Well, when you hear people talking about the war on cancer, what's your thoughts? Are we winning that war?
Well, it's been a long struggle in terms of trying to understand what cancer really is and how to best treat it. As you said, the war on cancer in 1971, that act provided an important amount of new resources by the federal government into understanding the molecular basis for cancer. What are the causes of cancer? That act provided increased funding for the National Cancer Institute to then provide funding for universities around the country to attract scientists to actually focus on the problem. And there has been a lot of success. It takes a long time to understand the problem. But through that increased funding for cancer research, we made a lot of advances in early detection, diagnosis, treatment, and even prevention for cancer. So today, actually, there are 10 million Americans alive as cancer survivors. That's 3 times more than that were alive in 1971 as cancer survivors. So yes, there has been some remarkable improvements that have led to people living longer, even after being diagnosed with cancer.
Because before, when someone would find out if they had cancer, it was really considered a death sentence. And now they can either have a chance to continue to live many more years or even survive that cancer during their lifetime. 1
out of 2 Americans will be diagnosed with cancer in their lifetime. Turns out to be 1 out of 2 men, 1 out of 3 women. So the prevalence of cancer is still very high, although there are some trends suggesting that at least with some cancers is starting to decrease. For example, lung cancer in men starting to decrease once men started to stop smoking as much. Breast cancer incidence, which was increasing 1 to 2% per year since 1970, started to just last year start to plateau and go downward. So we're starting to see some trends in leveling off, but most cancers have had a very significant pattern of either stable or increasing incidence over the years. Yet, people being diagnosed with cancer have a much better chance of surviving that disease. Just in breast cancer, in 1971, there was about a 70% chance of surviving that disease. Today, it's almost 90%. It's over 85% to 90% chance of surviving that disease when you're diagnosed with breast cancer. So there are a lot of women out there who are now breast cancer survivors. It's the largest group of breast cancer cancer survivors in the United States and in the world. So there has been significant hopes. There are other diseases where it's been much more difficult to find the treatments or the early detection or the diagnosis that would be needed to actually make a significant improvement in that. One of them is pancreatic cancer.
Okay. Well, I know this is probably a loaded question, but have you ever thought about, I know this is what you work for every day, but seeing a cure for cancer in your lifetime?
We're starting to see significant improvements in our ways of approaching these diseases. We're now starting to focus on defining molecularly defined targets that are important in cancer cells. Instead of treating all breast cancer patients exactly alike, instead of treating all prostate cancer exactly the same way, we're actually now focusing on the genetic changes that occur in those diseases and trying to find therapies that target those specific changes. Some of the new targeted therapies, for example, in breast cancer, like Herceptin, an antibody that targets a protein called HER2/neu, which is overexpressed only on 25% of breast cancer. So we use it only in that cohort of patients, and it's shown remarkable success and also very limited toxicity. Another drug that people have heard about is Gleevec, a small molecule that's targeting an important protein that's turned on in certain types of leukemia. It's a pill that you take. It targets only that particular protein kinase, and it is very effective in treating that disease when 10 years ago it was a very difficult disease to treat. So we're starting to see the changes in the way we approach these diseases, and technology has actually changed the way we approach how do we diagnose these diseases. We've been able to use some very sophisticated technologies, in part that came out of the Human Genome Project, where the Human Genome Project was sponsored by the NIH. However, it was a worldwide collaboration to actually, with public and private money, to support sequencing of the human genome. That sequencing of the DNA of the human genome provided us with all the information we need about the normal genes in cells. And it also now provides us with the information of all the genes we now know that could be changed or altered to become, for a cell to become malignant or a cancer. So once we know the 10 or 20 or 30 genes that caused a specific cancer to become that particular cancer, and we now know that different types of genes are turned on in different types of breast cancer, so we shouldn't be treating them all alike. We should be treating them on the basis of which genes are turned on or turned off, and targeting, personalizing the therapy, so that each person will be treated differently, specifically for their particular disease.
Which is so encouraging for patients to know that their care is just getting even more personalized.
And I think over the next decade, we really started this change in the paradigm of how we are focusing on how to treat cancer, because for the first 30 years, from 1971 to about the early 90s, we were identifying drugs through a variety of laboratory tests and then in animal studies that were shown to be effective in treating different types of cancers, and then take them into clinical trials and showing they would be effective. But now we're entering a time of stepping back, looking at what are the genes and the targets that are important in cancer, and designing therapies and drugs that are specific for those targets. The next 10 years, I think we'll see dramatically new improvements in the way we approach cancer, and I think a lot more successes.
Well, the Epley Cancer Center on the campus of the University of Nebraska Medical Center in Omaha, especially for the viewers that are watching in other parts of the state, are not very familiar with it. So tell us a little bit about the history of the Cancer Center, and I know it's recognized not only statewide but nationally as well. So tell us a little bit about, and being the medical director, the exciting things that are going on there.
Sure. So the cancer research effort at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and indeed at the University of Nebraska, started with the establishment of the Epley Institute for Research in Cancer and Allied Diseases, it was called, and it was established in 1960. That started a focus through, again, a generous donation from the Epley Foundation to start a focus on the campus, specifically in the area of cancer research, a multidisciplinary research institute focusing on the problems of cancer, which 45 years ago was a pretty revolutionary thing among medical schools to start a focus on a particular area of diseases like cancer. Out of that, an important emphasis on cancer research established at the university, and in 1971, when the War on Cancer Act was established by President Nixon and Congress, that provided the funding for the National Cancer Institute to enhance cancer research around the country by establishing a program called the National Cancer Institute Designated Cancer Centers Program. This was supposed to provide monies for regional centers of cancer research excellence around the country. It was supposed to be designed so that one of these regional cancers would exist within a day's drive of every person with cancer in the United States. The Epley Institute then became a National Cancer Institute Designated Cancer Center at UNMC in 1984. So shortly after that program was established, the Institute applied, and within a year was awarded the grant. We've been a National Cancer Institute Designated Cancer Center since 1984. There are only 61 of these NCI, or National Cancer Institute Designated Cancer, in the entire United States. And actually, if you look on the map of where the other ones are located and where we are the only one, certainly in Nebraska. We're also the only one National Cancer Institute designated cancer center in the entire central region of the United States, from North Dakota all the way down to Texas. So in the central region of the United States, where we're supposed to provide a regional influence and advice for not only patients but physicians and people in our area, we have a wide area to help serve in this region. So it's important for not only for Nebraska but for our entire region that this center of excellence, of research excellence, which is focusing on laboratory sciences, understanding the causes of cancer and the defects that occur in cancer, but also on the clinical research in cancer. How do we translate the discoveries in the laboratories, including our own laboratories, into new treatments for patients in our communities and in our whole region? New therapies, new diagnosis, new screening technologies, and how do we have the same dialogue going on from our clinic? How do our physicians pose questions back to our scientists, like Tony Hollingsworth sitting here? How do we identify the questions for them to refocus the agenda of the research laboratories to identify the problems that are most important to the patients we're seeing in the clinic every day?
Okay. Well, Dr. Tony Hollingsworth, we're not forgetting about you. I'm going to reintroduce you now and have you talk a little bit about pancreatic cancer. That's really been your focus lately, especially with a program, Rapid Autopsy Program, which probably sounds so weird to folks out there. What does that really mean? Describe what's been going on. But first off, I want you to talk about that pancreatic cancer is really, really a lethal cancer.
That's right. So I think in contrast to a lot of other cancers where there has been progress made, pancreatic cancer has lagged behind that. I think a lot of people don't realize it's a very lethal cancer. So in the U.S. there are just over 30,000 new cases of pancreatic cancer diagnosed each year. There are also just over 30,000 deaths. So the lethality of this disease is very high, and unfortunately the patients usually die very soon after diagnosis. And part of the reason for that is the fact that the disease is not diagnosed very early. A lot of people don't realize that more people die of pancreatic cancer per year in the U.S. than die of prostate cancer. So in contrast, prostate cancer is a very prevalent disease. It's very prevalent among older men, but it's not very lethal. So there are less than 30,000 deaths a year of prostate cancer.
Why is that? Is it because it's so hard to detect this type of cancer?
I think in part it is very difficult to diagnose it. And the other problem is that with pancreatic cancer, the symptoms are, there's nothing that really sets it apart from other problems that you might have. So a lot of the early symptoms of the disease are vague, and they're associated with problems that most people have. So low back pain, indigestion, things like that persist for a very long period of time. And probably, 50 or 100 million people in the U.S. have low back pain or indigestion at any given time, and obviously most of those people don't have pancreatic cancer. And so usually the real tip-off to the physicians is patients develop jaundice, let's say, and they present with some jaundice, which is a yellowing color to your skin and yellowing in the whites of your eyes, it appears. And so usually the physicians start to work you up for pancreatic cancer at that point in time. So an early diagnostic test with this disease would probably help. So the 2% of patients who are cured of this disease are usually cured by surgical resection. So if you catch it early and you resect it, just like a lot of other cancers, then you can actually be cured of pancreatic cancer. So we think early detection would help a lot.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about this Rapid Autopsy Program. I think people hear that name and they probably wonder, what is that? So tell us a little bit about how this works and who becomes involved.
Right. So I guess we don't really like to call it a Rapid Autopsy Program, although that's the technical term for it. We actually like to think of it as being an organ donation program for pancreatic cancer. So if you want to think of it in those terms, it's a little bit more like that. A lot of people are organ donors, right, for different purposes. I'm certainly an organ donor. If something untoward happened to me, then I would be delighted if my organs could be used to provide life to other people. So one of the big problems we have with pancreatic cancer is that because of the fact that it's diagnosed so late, it's very seldom resected. And so the problem that presents to researchers is that we never really get any access to tissues from patients that have that disease. And so historically it's been very difficult to study the disease because researchers didn't get access to those tissues, and that's one of the reasons that we haven't been able to make very much progress.
That's unlike other cancers like breast cancer.
Right, or colon cancer. So you're screened by colonoscopy. They can go in with the colonoscope and they can obtain pre-malignant lesions and malignant lesions from the colon. Or breast cancer, obviously they do a lot of biopsies for that. Other types of cancers too.
Okay.
You can detect it fairly early, but pancreatic cancer isn't really detected that early. And there has been shown that there's not very much benefit really in doing surgical resections on patients with advanced disease, which is the majority of the cases. And so we've not been able to get access to a lot of different tissues. So I've been researching pancreatic cancer for probably about 20 years now. And so I've been thinking about this problem for a long time. And so one of the unique things that we've been able to put together at UNMC at the Epley Cancer Center has been this program whereby patients who die with pancreatic cancer can donate their organs for purposes of research. And so we had a recent article about this where the reporter who actually reported in this article said that presented it in a way that they said, well, this is a way that the patients can fight cancer even after death. And I really like that. I think it's exactly right. So what we do with this program is that when the patients agree to die in hospice or near the hospital, and then their organs are harvested like they would be if they'd been an accident victim who would be donating their organs for other purposes. And in that way we're able to, we have a team of about 18 people from the medical center who are volunteers who actually come in and process these organs in a rapid manner where we can study them and really hope to gain insight about the disease process. I think this program will enable us to study things about the disease that we've never been able to look at before. And so that's really the essence of the program.
I know what you're studying too is trying to figure out why does this type of cancer march so aggressively through the body?
Right, so the big question that I'd like to know is why does cancer kill you? What is it about the cancer that actually causes you to die? And although people think that would be an easy question to ask and to study, it's not, because a lot of times we tend to look at these things like looking at one isolated little cell or one organ or tissue, and we don't really look at the disease in a composite way. And so I think that we'd like to ask that question. So by actually harvesting organs from individuals who have died, we can go in and look and see how has the tumor, when it's spread to different organ sites, actually compromised the function of those organs and actually caused the patient to die. We hope in the future that would allow us to actually suggest new therapies, things that would maybe cause the tumors to act in a different way where they didn't cause your organs to malfunction and cause these secondary effects so that you would die so quickly and rapidly with this disease.
Well, I know another question is some people die from large tumors and others might have small ones, but it proves to be just as lethal. Too many of us out there would think a larger tumor would be more deadly, but that's not necessarily the case.
Right. So in fact, if you look at the way that cancer spreads, sometimes there are very big tumors and sometimes there are lots of little small tumors, and so the bulk of disease can be different. But in fact, when the tumors start to grow, what happens is they go to a different organ site and they may start producing factors and things that are not normally made there, and that might cause that organ to shut down. And if you have a small tumor that's making a very high concentration of those things, then it's going to be just as deadly as a large tumor that's making lower concentrations of those factors. So it's not entirely just the fact that the tumor replaces your organ, it's the interaction that it has with that organ and the problems that it causes that ultimately cause you to die with cancer.
Well, your pancreatic study, it's really it's a comprehensive program, but within 2 hours after death is when you're requiring these autopsies to be done.
That's right. The rapid nature of this is critical because the tissue starts to deteriorate if you can't really get access to it very quickly. And as Ken was saying earlier, when you're trying to study very specific molecular alterations that happen in cells, if the tissue is deteriorating and starting to break down, then you're not able to get as much information from that. And so the rapid nature really is very important. And in fact, what we'll do is process the tissue in a way that it gets dissected and then frozen very rapidly.
And you have to have patients then sign consent, obviously, to participate in this beforehand.
Right. It's a remarkable thing that I think that patients do for this program, and in some ways, I think it's really the true essence of the human spirit that they're able to give finally, in this way. And so it's a careful consideration that you have to give, I think, obviously as much as you would give for organ donation. Mm-hmm. And so you need to have the consent of the patient and oftentimes the consent of the family as well.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add that these tissue resources, these banks of biospecimens, become a critically important national resource. As I mentioned today, technology in the laboratory has advanced incredibly over the last decade or so. We now need to apply that technology to human disease. And if you go around, there are very few banks where you can go to of patients with pancreatic cancer. Even with breast cancer, very common disease, there are very few very well characterized tissue banks of cancers from a variety of different patients and variety of different locations in the body, as well as treated with different mechanisms, treated in different ways, so that we can look at what are the genes that are important for determining this disease to begin with. What are the genes that are important to make it spread to other organs? What is the response of those tumor cells to the types of therapy that those patients may have received? There's a new project that the National Cancer Institute is opening up this year called the Cancer Genome Anatomy Project. And what they're doing is focusing on 3 different types of cancers. They're starting to look at this, where they're going to go to specimen banks of places where they have a large number of a certain type of cancer. They're going to focus on 3 different cancers now, and they're going to completely sequence the DNA in those cancer cells from those specimens, from 30 to 50 different patients in them. And they're going to have it done from a variety of different labs to compare the results. But the idea is to identify, completely sequencing, just like that Human Genome Project I told you in the beginning, sequence all the normal DNA. We've never sequenced entirely all the DNA in a cancer cell. It's never been done before. We sequenced one gene in a cancer cell many times to see if it's been mutated in many cancers. But now we're going to take one person's cancer, actually take them from 50 different people, and completely sequence the entire genome from 50 different patients with 50 different types of one type of cancer. And they're still trying to figure out which cancers they're going to look at. But these types of specimen banks, harvested in a particular rigorous fashion like they've set up here, is critically important as a national resource, not only for our cancer center, but Tony's group works with pancreatic cancer centers around the world, looking at, because as you pointed out, pancreatic cancer is a relatively, fortunately, not common disease, but it's very lethal. But all these centers have to work together to understand and move progress in this field as quickly as possible. One of the successes of the Eppley Cancer Center over the past 25 years has been our lymphoma team has started 25 years ago. Not only from every patient they saw, they actually harvested and banked part of the lymphoma specimen. Well, they have over, I think, 3,800 specimens from lymphoma specimens from different patients treated over the last 25 years. And this has been entered into some of these new technology studies called gene array, expression array data, etc., that have enabled them to understand that not all lymphomas are alike. They're all different types of genetic changes, sort of like I was alluding to before. So having specimen banks provides the researcher with a tremendous tool to then examine the specific defects in cancer cells, which are the altered genes that are important for that cancer to grow abnormally and then to spread abnormally. And those genes that are important become the targets that you want to interfere with in the future, developing inhibitors against those specific targets.
Well, I know there's such excellent research going on at the Eppley Cancer Center, and that's going to make you feel so good to go to work every day, knowing that that's something that we can do here in the state of Nebraska. And one way that we can see that we're getting really recognized nationally is that you have a big event coming up, and someone, of course, who's known across the nation by almost every single person is going to be there. And the Eppley Cancer Center will be recognizing legendary newscaster Tom Brokaw at their Ambassador of Hope event that's coming up October 13th, which will be held at the Quest Center Omaha. And this is a fundraising effort for the Epley Cancer Center, and something unique too about this event is that it will be satellite broadcast to other communities in Nebraska. So if you don't live in Omaha and don't have a chance to get to the Quest Center Omaha, on the evening of October 13th, the Nebraska cities Lexington, Norfolk, and Sidney will also have receptions where they can watch this evening be broadcast and hear from Tom Brokaw that evening. But I really wanted you, Dr. Cowan, to talk a little bit about why fundraising efforts like this are so critical to not only the Epley Cancer Center, but other cancer centers.
Well, fundraising is critically important for research. The federal government has been a major supporter of research in this country and has actually made science in this country the pinnacle of all the world. We provide more money through our federal government for research in this country than any other country or any other region in the world. But as you know, the federal budget is currently under restrictions because of all the other things that the federal budget has to support. And funding for research has actually started to decrease this year for the first time ever. I sit on the National Cancer Advisory Board and been going over the budget for that. And this year, the proposed budget for the National Cancer Institute will be lower than the last year for the first time since the war on cancer started in 1971. Well, we need to be able to continue to push forward the frontier of research to provide the hope for cancer patients for today and for tomorrow. We know that there's a great excitement for getting these discoveries in the laboratory and translating them into new therapies quickly, and every minute counts. So we need the support, private support, to help make sure that we can recruit and retain here at the Epley Cancer Center the very best cancer researchers like Dr. Hollingsworth. We've been recruiting actually nonstop for the last 7 years. We've recruited over 60 new cancer researchers to Nebraska in the last 7 years. Our research funding has more than tripled. We've gone up to over $60 million coming into Nebraska annually to support the research endeavors at the Epley Cancer at the University of Nebraska. We need private support to help us to continue to recruit new faculty to build the programs in the focused areas that we think we can make a major impact: pancreatic cancer, breast cancer, lymphomas, prostate cancer. We think we can make an important contribution in the research endeavors. The private support helps us to make sure that our researchers have a competitive edge, to make sure they can keep their competitive programs going, and be
I'm going to let people know so they can find out more information because we're wrapping up here real quick. But the epleyhope.org is the web address where you can go and find out more information about that event. And of course, if you don't live in Omaha, Lexington, Norfolk, and Sidney, those cities as well, you have a chance to participate if you live around those cities. And also www.unmc.edu is a great website to go to find out more about the Epley Cancer Center. Thanks for joining us this week on Consider This.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 10th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.